where we're literally cracking open the files on one of the most fascinating and honestly most enduring mysteries in modern history. We are looking at the only undocumented, completely unsolved case of air piracy in the entire history of commercial aviation. It's an absolute roller coaster of a story. We're talking audacity, brilliant planning, and a vanishing act so perfect that it has baffled the FBI for over 50 years.
I mean, you really have to wonder, how exactly does a person commandeer a massive Boeing 727, extract a huge ransom, and then just leap out into the pitch-black, freezing rain over rugged wilderness, only to disappear, just vanish? I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a detective opening a cold case file from November 24, 1971. To figure out how this ghost story was actually pulled off, we got to go back to exactly where it all started.
Section 1. The Hijacking of Flight 305, Thanksgiving Eve, 1971.
So, picture this. A man walks right up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport and pays cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle. He gives his name as Dan Cooper. He's a white male, looks to be in his mid-40s, and he's wearing this sharp business suit, a crisp white shirt, a black clip-on tie, and a trench coat. He boards Flight 305, strolls to the very back, takes seat 18E, and orders a bourbon and 7-Up. Normal enough, right? Well, shortly after takeoff, he hands a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Now, she thought he was just some lonely businessman slipping her his phone number, so she just drops it in her purse. But then Cooper leans in and whispers that she really needed to look at it. The note contained those chilling words, "Ms., I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." And to prove he wasn't bluffing, he just cracked open his briefcase. Right inside, Schaffner saw a massive battery wired to 8 red cylinders. They looked exactly like dynamite.
Understandably, Schaffner took his demands straight to the cockpit. And the specifics of these demands? They showed just how incredibly calculated Cooper really was. He wanted $200,000, which, by the way, is about $1.6 million in today's money, and he wanted it in unmarked $20 bills. But the truly brilliant, almost genius move here is his second demand: 4 parachutes. By asking for 2 primary and 2 reserve parachutes, he completely boxed the FBI into a corner. Think about it. The authorities had to assume he might actually take hostages with him when he jumped. Because of that terrifying what if, there was no way they could risk giving him fake or sabotaged equipment. They absolutely had to supply him with the real, fully functional deal.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this built. Things escalated incredibly fast. Flight 305 ended up circling Seattle for about 2 hours while authorities on the ground were just scrambling to scrape together the money and the parachutes. They finally land at 5:46 p.m. And through all this, Cooper was chillingly calm. He even offered to tip the flight attendants. Wild, right? Once the cash and the parachutes are brought on board, he lets all the passengers go, but the nightmare definitely wasn't over for the skeleton crew. After a brief delay for refueling, by 7:40 p.m., he forces the pilots right back up into the sky, pointing them south toward Reno, Nevada. And then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., the pilots felt it, a sudden, very distinct upward pitch in the tail of the aircraft.
Section 2. A leap into the dark, escaping at 10,000 feet.
So that sudden bump the pilots felt? That was the exact moment Cooper executed the most dangerous phase of his entire plan. See, for the second leg of the flight, Cooper didn't just sit back. He issued highly specific, super technical flight configuration demands. He ordered a minimum airspeed, a maximum altitude of exactly 10,000 feet, the landing gear had to be down, and the wing flaps set to 15 degrees. Basically, this configuration forced the plane to fly slow and low without completely stalling out. But here's the real kicker. He demanded the plane take off with the cabin unpressurized, the aft door open, and the rear air stairs extended. Now, the Boeing 727 was actually one of the only commercial jets in the entire world with a rear staircase that could be lowered in mid-flight. It was a feature the CIA actively used in Vietnam. Cooper clearly knew about this highly confidential capability, and he used it to make sure he could literally walk right off the back of the plane without getting sucked into an engine.
But listen, just knowing the mechanical quirks of a 727 doesn't make the jump itself any less insane. At 8:13 p.m., Cooper stepped off those stairs and jumped into pitch blackness. It's raining, the wind chill is sitting at a brutal 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and he's plunging straight down into the heavily wooded, incredibly rugged terrain of the Pacific Northwest. Oh, and he's doing all this wearing slip-on business shoes, a trench coat, and lugging around a 19-pound bag of cash. As the tail of the plane pitched upward, Dan Cooper was entirely swallowed by the storm. Section 3. The clues left behind. Physical evidence. When the plane finally touched down safely in Reno, with those rear stairs literally dragging along the runway, the cabin was completely empty. The man had just vanished. But he didn't disappear entirely. If you put on your detective hat, he actually left a bizarre little breadcrumb trail of evidence. Inside the cabin, specifically right around seat 18E, the FBI managed to find 66 latent fingerprints, 8 Raleigh filter-tip cigarette butts, and a couple of hair samples, one from his head, one from a limb. Now, Cooper had been so meticulous during the flight, he even made the flight attendant give him back his handwritten notes and his empty matchbook so he wouldn't leave a trace. But he made one absolutely crucial mistake. He took off his black JCPenney clip-on tie and its mother-of-pearl tie clip and accidentally left them just resting on his seat. And decades later, that inexpensive little clip-on tie would become the FBI's most prized piece of evidence.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what investigators discovered years down the line. It's truly fascinating. In 2009, a team of citizen scientists took that tie and analyzed it using electron microscopes. And they didn't just find everyday dust or dirt. They found microscopic traces of incredibly rare metals. We're talking unalloyed titanium, cerium, and strontium sulfide. Back in 1971, pure titanium was exceptionally rare. You'd literally only find it in high-tech chemical plants or aerospace fabrication facilities, places like Boeing contractors. So this strongly suggests that Cooper wasn't just some random thug off the street. He was very likely an aeronautical engineer, a chemical worker, or at least someone deeply, deeply embedded in the aviation industry.
But then, we get to the parachute mystery, and this completely throws a wrench into the whole aviation mastermind theory. Remember, Cooper demanded 4 parachutes. He jumped wearing one functional, military-style main chute on his back. But for his front reserve, he accidentally grabbed a dummy parachute. It was a training prop, literally sewn shut for classroom demonstrations. Unusable. Meanwhile, he actually left the working reserve chute right there on the plane. And what's crazier? He slashed its canopy open just to use the fabric as a makeshift money bag. This massive, glaring blunder completely divided investigators. Was this guy an expert paratrooper who just made a rushed mistake in the dark? Or was he a total amateur who didn't even realize he was jumping with a fake reserve?
Well, despite massive search parties completely combing the Washington wilderness, no trace of Cooper, or the parachutes for that matter, was ever found. But out of the $200,000 ransom, which, remember, was 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, exactly $5,800 was eventually recovered. But that recovery didn't happen for another 9 years. Fast forward to 1980. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is out digging a campfire pit on a beachfront called Tina Bar, right along the Columbia River, and he unearths 3 decaying packets of Cooper's $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the ransom money perfectly. But here's the thing. This discovery just ignited an intense geological debate. The bills were still bundled up in their original rubber bands, which, scientifically speaking, really shouldn't have survived years sitting in a river. And to make it even weirder, later microscopic analysis of diatoms, which are these tiny algae found on the bills, suggested that the money didn't even enter the water in November of 1971, but rather months later in the spring. So did the money just wash down river naturally, or did someone come back and bury it there much, much later? Section 4. The Prime Suspects. Who was Dan Cooper?
For 45 years, the FBI launched a massive manhunt, processing over 1,000 suspects. They were hunting for a calm, intelligent guy in his mid-40s, with aviation knowledge, dark hair, and a desperate need for cash. But first, we really have to impartially weigh the FBI's own internal debate. Did the guy even survive the fall? Side A says absolutely not. The elements were brutal, it was a pitch-black night, freezing 15-degree wind chill, he had no proper boots or gear, the terrain was rugged, and hey, almost none of the ransom money was ever spent. But then you have Side B, which offers a seriously compelling counterargument. In the year right after Cooper's jump, 5 different copycat hijackers attempted very similar parachute escapes, and guess what? All 5 of them survived. If they could pull it off, why couldn't a meticulous planner like Cooper? Because investigators never found a body and never found the parachutes, both of these theories remain completely viable.
Speaking of those copycats, one of them was a guy named Richard McCoy Jr. He is a super fascinating suspect. Just months after Cooper, McCoy hijacked a 727 with a hand grenade, demanded parachutes and $500,000 and jumped out over Utah. I mean, the crimes were practically identical. However, the FBI ultimately had to eliminate him. Why? Well, McCoy was only 29 years old, his facial features, specifically his ears and nose, didn't match the composite sketch, and he actually had a rock-solid, credible alibi of being home in Utah for Thanksgiving 1971. But most importantly, the flight attendants who spent hours sitting right next to Cooper looked straight at McCoy's photo and firmly said, nope, that's not him.
Then there's Robert Rackstraw. This guy was a true rogue. He was an ex-convict, a Vietnam helicopter crewman, and he actually possessed military parachute training. He even tried to fake his own death years later by crashing a rented airplane. He absolutely loved teasing the media, sometimes dropping hints that he actually was Cooper. But again, the facts just didn't align. He was only 28 at the time of the hijacking, which is way too young to match that mid-40s description. Plus, there was absolutely zero DNA or direct physical evidence linking him to the plane or that tie. And, just like with McCoy, the flight attendants completely dismissed his photograph.
Now, perhaps the most capable suspect on the list was Ted Braden. Braden was a Special Forces commando who ran highly classified ops in Vietnam. The man had 911 recorded military jumps under his belt. He was 43 years old, had the right dark complexion, and had a long history of running elaborate trucking scams and financial crimes. A family member literally called him the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality. He seems like the perfect fit, right? But like the others, there was a mismatch. At 5'8", he was quite a bit shorter than what the eyewitnesses recalled. And more importantly, without a definitive DNA match to the tie or the hair samples, even a perfect resume like Ted Braden's remains exactly that. Just a theory.
Section 5. Legacy of D.B. Cooper, the Unsolved Mystery. And as a quick aside, his real alias on the ticket was actually Dan Cooper. DB was just a media transcription error that caught on and stuck forever, immortalizing a legend and adding just another layer of myth to the whole crime.
So the crucial point is what this crime actually changed in the real world. Cooper's incredibly audacious jump and that string of 15 copycats that tried to replicate it the very next year permanently altered commercial aviation safety. Airports started implementing universal baggage searches, and the FAA mandated the installation of something called the Cooper vane on the exterior of all Boeing 727s. It's this incredibly simple, spring-loaded aerodynamic paddle that physically prevents that rear air stair from being lowered while the plane is in flight. Literally, because of Dan Cooper, no one could ever pull off this specific trick ever again. After 45 years of chasing ghosts, analyzing decaying $20 bills, and tracking down partial DNA profiles, the official manhunt finally came to an end. On July 8, 2016, the FBI officially suspended the active investigation into the case. They had hit too many dead ends, so they redirected their resources to more urgent modern priorities. But they left the massive 66-volume case file open for historical purposes.
Which leaves us right here. We've got a cheap clip-on tie, a few bundles of rotting cash, and a mystery that simply refuses to die. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer as we walked through the crazy evidence of Flight 305. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. With the official investigation suspended and the rest of the money lost to the river, did the freezing Washington wilderness simply swallow up an amateur thief who made a fatal miscalculation? Or did a meticulous mastermind walk out of those woods right into the pages of history, forever holding the title of the perfect unsolved crime? Let that sink in.